is the act of using goods and services for personal or family use. Any expenditure made on consumer goods and services is called consumption expenditure. Household consumption is broadly classified into two called autonomous consumption and induced consumption. Autonomous consumption is household consumption when their disposable income is zero. That means even though we don't have money, we can't survive. But how can we survive without money? There are a means of meeting portion of the autonomous consumption of a household. Students, how can people meet portion of their autonomous consumption? How can people live without money? Disposable income decreases is called induced consumption. So it is dependent on the level of disposable income. So the total consumption spending of a household is the sum of the autonomous consumption and the induced consumption. Now let's illustrate this consumption theory using the following consumption schedule. Here, when your disposable income is zero, the total consumption spending is 75 birr. In this case, the level of saving is negative 75. That means there is this saving. Whenever there is an excess of consumption expenditure over disposable income, there is this saving. When disposable income is 100 birr, then the total consumption spending is 100 birr, so there is no saving. This is the break-even. Is occurred when the total consumption expenditure is equal to the disposable income. In this case, there is no saving. When disposable income is 200 birr, the total consumption spending is 125 birr. In this case, there is an excess of disposable income over consumption spending, which is 75 birr. Then there is saving of 75 birr. Saving is portion of household's income that is not consumed, or simply anything that is not consumed is saved. When disposable income is 300 birr, total consumption expenditure is 150 birr, and the total saving is 150 birr. When disposable income is 400 birr, total consumption expenditure is 175, and the saving of this household is 225 birr. So the graphical representation of the consumption schedule is called consumption curve, and just represent all the values of consumption spending in the Y and all the values of disposable income in the X to plot the consumption curve. This is the 45-degree line called income equals to the consumption plus saving curve, and this is the consumption curve. Starting from this point to this point, the total consumption spending is above. In this case, this is the saving area. At this point, the disposable income of a household is equal to total consumption spending, which is 100 birr, This is the break-even point. At the break-even point, the disposable income is equal to consumption, and the level of saving of the household is always zero. Another point on the consumption curve is about the slope of a consumption curve. The slope of a consumption curve is positive because there is a direct relationship between consumption of a commodity and disposable income. That means as disposable income increases, the total consumption spending will also increase, and with the decline in disposable income, then the consumption of a household will decline. So due to this direct relationship between the changes in the direction of consumption and the changes in the direction of disposable income, the consumption curve is always positively sloped. Now let's see the consumption function. The consumption function shows the mathematical relationship between consumption expenditure and disposable income. So consumption is a function of disposable income. The total consumption spending is the sum of the autonomous consumption and the induced consumption. Households can only spend their disposable income on consumption or saving. That means households' disposable income is the sum of the total consumption spending and savings. Now let's see the sum of the consumption functions called the average propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to consume. The average propensity to consume is the fraction of disposable income that is spent on consumption. Mathematically, the average propensity to consume is calculated by dividing total consumption spending for disposable income. For example, a consumer spent per 600 per from disposable income of per 1000. That means the total consumption spending is 600 per and the disposable income is 1000 per. Hence, when we cancel 2 zeros, 4 2 zeros, 6 over 10 is 0.6. This 0.6 tells us if a consumer spent per 600 from disposable income of 1000 per, then this household is spending 60% of his disposable income for consumption. Now let's see the properties of the average propensity to consume. Whenever disposable income increases, the average propensity to consume decreases. That means APC and disposable income are inversely related. Conversely, whenever disposable income decreases, the average propensity to consume will increase. The average propensity to consume is usually between 0 and 1, but if there is an autonomous consumption, the average propensity to consume will be above 1. Now let's see the marginal propensity to consume, the MPC. MPC is the additional consumption spending from additional disposable income. Mathematically, the marginal propensity to consume is calculated by dividing the change in consumption for the change in disposable income. For example, as disposable income increases from 1,000 to 2,000, the total consumption spending increases from 800 to 1,400. Here, when we calculate the MPC, it is calculated by dividing change in the consumption for the change in disposable income. And the change in consumption means consumption final minus consumption initial divided by change in disposable income is disposable income final minus disposable income initial. So, as disposable income increased from 1,000 to 2,000, the given information is that disposable income was initially 1,000 per, and finally the disposable income increases to 2,000. As a result, what would happen to consumption spending? Consumption spending was initially 800 per, and finally the consumption spending increased to 1,400. And then when we substitute this information on this formula, we get the value of consumption final is 1,400 per minus consumption initial is 800 per divided by disposable income final is 2,000 minus disposable income initial is 1,000, and then the marginal propensity to consume will be 1,400 minus 800 is 600 divided by 2,000 minus 1,000 is 1,000, and then when we cancel 2 zeros for 0, then we left with 6 over 10, which is 0.6. So the marginal propensity to consume for this household is 0.6. Now let's see the properties of marginal propensity to consume. Whenever disposable income increases, MPC will decline. That means MPC and disposable income are inversely related. Whenever disposable income decreases, MPC increases. MPC is always between 0 and 1. It relies between 0 and 1. It is not above 1 or below 0. The marginal propensity to consume of the poor is higher than the rich. This is because the poor spend more on consumption from their additional disposable income than that of the rich, because they cannot fulfill all their needs and wants. So the marginal propensity to consume for the poor is always higher than the marginal propensity to the rich. MPC is stable in the short run since we cannot adjust most of our needs and disposable income in the short period of time. So the marginal propensity to consume is stable in the short run. The marginal propensity to consume is the slope of a linear consumption function. Since we calculated the marginal propensity to consume by dividing the change in consumption for the change in disposable income, and when we plot the consumption curve, if you remember, we represented all the values of consumption in the y-axis and all the values of disposable income in the x. So this will give us change in y for the change in x, which is the vertical difference divided by the horizontal difference. And what can we get by dividing the vertical difference for the horizontal difference? It is the slope. So indirectly, the marginal propensity to consume is the slope of a linear consumption function. Now let's see the determinants of consumption. First, as disposable income increases, then what would happen to consumption? The level of consumption will also decline. And when the disposable income decreases, the total consumption spending will decline. So other things remain unchanged. There is a direct relationship between the changes in the direction of consumption and disposable income. Another determinant is saving. While disposable income of households remains unchanged, then as the level of saving of a household increase, then what would happen to consumption will decline, and with the decline in saving, consumption will increase. So other things remain unchanged. There is an inverse relationship between the changes in the direction of saving and consumption spending. The other determinant is deposit rates. If banks offer higher deposit rates, people tend to save more now, and if people tend to save more now, then their consumption will decline. And with the decline in deposit rate, the total consumption spending will increase. So again, there is an inverse relationship between the changes in the direction of deposit rates and consumption spending. Direct tax is another determinant. As the level of direct tax increases, then disposable income will decline. And with the decline in disposable income, total consumption spending will decline. And with the fall in the direct tax imposed by government on personal income, then total consumption spending will increase. So other things remain unchanged. There is an inverse relationship between the changes in the direction of direct tax and the changes in the direction of consumption spending. Another determinant is future price expectation. As future price expectation increases, if you expect higher prices in the near future, then the total consumption spending will increase, and if you expect lower prices in the near future, total consumption spending will decline. Now let's see the other determinants called future income expectation. If you expect higher income in the near future, then you will consume more now. So higher future income expectation induces consumption, and lower future income expectation reduces consumption. Households' indebtedness is another determinant. If households are more indebted, they will put their disposable income for settling the debt, and their consumption will decline. And with the fall in households' indebtedness, the total consumption spending will increase. Income inequality is another determinant. If there is higher income inequality in a country, then the aggregate consumption level will decline. And if the income inequality is lower, then the total consumption spending will increase. Wealth is another determinant. With increase in wealth, or wealthy families have higher consumption spending, and if the wealth of a nation is lower, the total consumption spending or aggregate consumption will decline. Age composition is another determinant. Young families have higher consumption expenditure, and older families have lower consumption expenditure. Still, we saw the determinants of consumption, the consumption function, the types of consumption, the schedule of consumption, and the consumption curve in our today's